For me, I had heard about CGS from my sister-in-law, who had been on the level 1 catechesis training and really loved it. And I'd heard from a few other people about it, but I didn't really know much more about it. So the last few years have been kind of getting to know it more. Obviously hiring our music director, who was interested in doing catechesis here, and she went on the trainings, has really loved it, brought it here. And I was privileged to be able to take part in the infant toddler catechesis these last 2 years, and have really just enjoyed it tremendously.
Tell us about that. How do you teach the faith to an infant?
Oh, boy, that one is really remarkable. I think for me, I had studied embryology when I was at college, and so I really loved just all of the intricacies of what was happening biologically, and realizing that, yes, there is a deep mystery that's happening even from conception. And that's why we see even in the scriptures how Elizabeth goes into seclusion, and so does the mother of Samuel, goes into seclusion, because we want the environment, even from the womb, from the earliest time, to be a holy time, to be a time where the Lord can encounter the mother and the child both. But just seeing that the preparation time isn't just making the crib and doing other things in the room, but it's something far more remote that's happening before even we're aware of it. And so I think we know about human development now is confirming that the children are just receiving everything, they're soaking everything up, and so we want to make sure that everything they're exposed to in this time is something beautiful and good and true.
That's really beautiful. Can you give me some more examples? What does that mean?
So I think for definitely during the time of pregnancy, it seems pretty obvious we want mothers to be eating well and taking care of themselves, but really what environment are they in? Is it an environment that's anxious, frenetic, scattered, loud, or is it something that's contemplative, peaceful? And that has impacts on the child that we're only beginning to discover now. But I think just anecdotally, we think of some couples who take time every day and they pray together, and the father blesses the child in the womb. And we're even noticing that sometimes, after a bit when they do that, the child begins to roll over to that side during prayer time, or just to recognize the voices. So we know something's going on that's very profound. Those are just little things, but I think also after the child's born, you just see they are soaking up everything, literally everything, and it's just empowering parents to really think about that. What is the environment that they're in? What does it look like, both visually and sonically? Like what's happening to the child? What are they picking up? Because it's important.
Right. One of the things that we notice, like in the atrium setting, is that the colors are all very natural and muted. The light is soft.
Yes.
Why is that important?
Well, I'm not maybe the best one to answer this, but I think it seems like because they're developing and they don't have quite the capacity to receive some of these things, it's confusing. If you put them with too much stimulation, I think that's why we see. There's this great book, Glow Kids, that was kind of looking at the studies of developing brains and the impact of screens, and we see just how detrimental it is with all the flashing lights and all of the changing, the rapid pace of things, how it's deformative of the child. And so I think even just modern psychology is recognizing this, that all of this stimulation is unhealthy. We need to really strip away and get to the most essential things. I think that's just the refrain over and over again in the catechesis. What is the most essential for the child? To remove everything that's not essential, and to just have the building blocks, the foundation be firm, so that everything that comes afterwards is able to rest on a solid foundation.
And what are you seeing as a result of that?
Well, it's very early for us. I mean, obviously we haven't implemented the atrium for the youngest child yet. The 3 to 6 year olds and the level 2, which is still a little bit wonky for us, so we don't have enough catechists yet. But I think we are noticing that just Sarah has some beautiful stories of just the kids, of how they're picking up things intuitively, and really seeing what was one of them. Golly. She'd be much better at this. I wasn't prepared for that. Yeah.
No, there was one thing that the catechist Maria said yesterday. She said that there was a little boy who wanted to understand about the altar, and after they had done the presentation, he's just sitting there with the candles lit and looking at the altar, and he said, Jesus wanted to give us his blood. Mm-hmm. And then he paused.
Yes.
And then he said, Jesus wanted to give us his love. Mm-hmm. And a 3-year-old boy saying that is pretty amazing.
Yes. No, I was reminded, that was a beautiful story. I remember Maria told us that at staff. It was like, that's just incredible. What kind of theology of the Sacred Heart already in a 3-year-old is understanding this. But actually there was another one of a little girl who lit the Paschal candle and just stared at the Paschal, just sat there quietly, didn't say a thing, but just stared at the Paschal candle in quiet for didn't move for 10, 15 minutes. And you're like, what is happening right now? Just their capacity for contemplation, their capacity to receive, and we're just so often missing that, or just providing way too much, and just very simple things, and they can encounter God. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Could you say what is contemplation?
Contemplation, I guess if you look at Christian contemplation, it's different than maybe what others would talk about. When we look at spiritual theology, we talk about Christian meditation and contemplation. Meditation is reflecting upon a truth. So you might look at the cross and meditate upon what's happening. Contemplation is a more infused reality, meaning something that you're meditating on something, and all of a sudden you receive something that's just beyond what you're thinking about. So infused contemplation is something you can't force, you can't make it happen. It's something that happens to you. You can only dispose yourself to receive it. It's you can set yourself up for quiet, you can provide the right encounter for it, but sometimes you're just very distracted. When contemplation happens, it's really something quite a gift from God and beautiful, and typically there's a communication of some kind of grace in that moment. The thing that Catechesis has been bringing to mind is it's not like regular classes. You can't just grab somebody and put them in charge of a class with fairly little instruction. Catechesis requires that you relearn how to learn, and that takes a lot of time. I think the thing that's been kind of surprising to people is how intense the formation is, that it'll take a couple of years to get a catechist ready to do this, and for a lot of parishes that's a huge obstacle to overcome. And so I was very grateful for the help of Opus to be able to provide the financial resources so we could actually get our people to start training to do this, because it's a big mountain to climb if you're starting from zero. And people have to be willing to be in it for the long haul, and sometimes you start and then they're not interested in continuing, and so it's a big challenge to get it started in a place what hasn't done it before.
But you have succeeded.
I would say we're getting there. It's one of those things that, yeah, it's taken a couple of years. It's a long, slow work. They're fond of saying that in the Catechesis formation. It's a slow work. You'd like to get it started right away. I would love to have it be the main formation for our sacramental preparation. We would need a lot more space for that to happen, and so it's just, we're building slowly. And so a parish, when you're trying to transition to catechesis, that's the main challenge, is saying, okay, we're not there yet. We still have kids that are going through and need sacramental formation. They still need religious education, but we don't have the ability to have everybody do this. And so how do you do that? And so that is a challenge. We're trying to figure out how best to still have some kind of classes, but also have this, because we're moving in that direction. We're doing the best we can, so yeah.
Have you noticed any difference in the children who have had a bit of catechesis at some level, like in attention or understanding? What are you seeing?
Yeah, the difference that I'm seeing in kids who are doing the catechesis is that they're teaching their parents some things. Like they're really going home, and their parents are really amazed by the kids. They know the liturgical colors, they know the vestments names, they know these kinds of things that typically we wouldn't cover in a regular class. I mean, we do tend to do open house things where we show the kids the sacristy and we show them the different things. But for their age group, for 3-year-olds and 6-year-olds to know what the colors mean and what the Advent candle means, the different colors, all that stuff. It's a beautiful liturgically focused model that I really like, because for me, really, and the Second Vatican Council, of course, also saying that the Eucharist is the source and the summit of our faith, that the catechesis really reflects that, of really having the children focus on the Mass as the fount of catechesis, and just all the liturgical expression being the source of their spiritual life.
Excellent. Let's talk a little bit more about that, because your liturgy has some particular aspects that I think are worth pointing out. Can you describe, first of all, what kind of community you've got, and then what's your vision for?
Sure. The parish here at St. Alice, we're a suburban parish. We're about 600 families, and about over half of them are Latino in origin. And so we do have kind of two parishes under one roof, and the challenge is, how do we bring them together? And so the church has always been a multicultural reality, and so for centuries we had a solution to this, was that we had one common liturgical language. After the Second Vatican Council, the vernacular became much more widespread, but always the Sacrosanctum Concilium, the document on the liturgy, really envisioned that although the vernacular could be more widely used, it says very clearly that it is really important that the Latin is to be retained and that everyone knows the parts of the Mass in Latin that pertain to them. And so what that allows then is that whether you come to the English Mass or the Spanish Mass, when we're saying the common responses, everyone's saying the same language, so it's not a cacophonous kind of response. And so what I found is that since we started doing this about 5 years ago, we started doing the Latin Mass ordinaries. So like the Kyrie, the Gloria, we haven't gotten to the Creed yet, we're working slowly on that, but like the Our Father especially, that's the big point there, that we would all pray the Our Father in one language. And that's the Latin language of the church. And so whatever culture you come from, you sort of nobody studied Latin in school unless you went to a classical school. I didn't study Latin in school, neither did vast majority of my people. But in that regard, it's a challenge for everybody. It's a sacrifice for everyone, and we abandon our culture to enter into the one culture of the church. And so once people started getting that, it's hard to change something that's maybe you're not familiar with. But what I found is that has brought about a tremendous union. So I see a lot more cross-pollination of people coming to different masses, right? Because we do have the missals that have the readings in their own language and whatnot, but then you're able to pray in the one language together, and that's been really good. So that's one aspect, is the common liturgical language. Obviously, we preach in the language of the vast majority of people who are here. We also started using a technology called Interaxio, which kind of allows us to do simultaneous translation. So for the big feasts, if somebody has a smartphone, they can have the app on their phone, and basically we have a translator in there who's translating the homily, for example, live, and they're hearing it on their earbuds. So that's a way also to kind of make it a little bit easier. We did that for classes too. It hasn't really manifested, but that's what we're doing for the healing retreat coming up, is that we're going to be using that technology here to kind of bridge the gap with language, because that is the fundamental challenge when you have two communities, is how do you understand each other. So that's one part. Yeah, the cultural reality is a tough one to blend. What I think is beautiful is looking at what are the particular gifts we have that we can help each other with. And I think the thing the Latino culture really brings to us that we've been trying to capitalize on is food and family. Food and family. And so I really have been focusing hard on trying to get us to eat together and to have family events, because they get together and eat all the time. Like, that's what they do. And we used to do that probably a generation ago, but just our culture has become more fractured in the United States in general. And so what I find helpful, that they really witness to us about the importance of having family meals. And so that, of course, has great resonance in the Eucharist, of course, that we get together as one family to have the Eucharist together. But then we built a commercial kitchen during COVID to really start to eat together and to share food together, because that's really the universal language also, is food. And so when we do that, I think it helps to get a lot of the barriers out of the way of saying, wow, you make amazing food, and like you do too, and we're sharing something very basic, and when you eat together, it's hard to be enemies. And so I found that that's also really brought together both sides of the community as well, because we realized the big gift we have in the parish is a lot of cooks. And I'm really happy about that, because I love food. But it's one of those things where that has helped to sort of help people see, family, faith, food, the Eucharist, these things, they're all just very essential realities. And once we kind of get away from, well, you speak this language, or you do this, or you dress differently than I do, like, we get to what is the essential piece, that we really want love. We really want to be one in Christ, and that the church provides us the ability, no matter what culture we have, to enter into the one culture, the one family, the one body, right? And so that is a process. It's taken a while. It's not over. It's definitely still early in some respects. But even this year with our faith formation, even the part that is not catechesis, what we're doing is focusing on family prayer, right? To really say, okay, you need to be having a family prayer plan. You need to have a family time together plan, because it doesn't matter if we do an hour a week here in class, if you don't back it up at home and you don't eat together, you're not going to keep the faith. And so I think that part has been helpful. But as far as cultural expectations, what's beautiful is that the Latino culture, they really love like processions and the devotional life and other things. And that's really helping us. It's really animating the Anglo side, because they see their devotion, for example, in adoration in the Blessed Sacrament. A lot of the Latinos, they'll walk backwards when they leave. I don't recommend it necessarily, because they'll trip or whatever, but it's a beautiful thing. They never turn their back on the Blessed Sacrament. Like that's a Latino cultural, kind of thing. In other countries, they do that too. But just when some Anglos, they see that and they go, what are they doing? And they're like, oh, they're not turning their back on the blessed. They're like, that's interesting, and it's causing them to think. So we're really having this mutual enrichment of culture and faith that I really find just to be really beautiful.
That's great.
Yeah.
How do they handle going back to the catechesis a little bit, the expectation, I mean, I don't know specifically this community, what feeling they have, but what my experience has been is that sometimes in the Latino culture, there's more of a sense that the important thing is the baptism and the confirmation, but the preparation for it is not so important. Like you need to get to the event, right? It's the party and so forth. How are you facing that?
With kicking and screaming, it's very difficult. Because yes, there is a Latino cultural thing of just because they're cultural Catholics, and we're not so much here in the States, but just because where their country of origin was, they had processions, they had feast days. Like every day, there's fireworks going off. There's some kind of procession. There's some kind of religious festival that's happening in a lot of their countries, and here there's not. And so they haven't adjusted to that reality yet. They're here. And they're like, well, I received the faith, and because it's baked into the DNA, whereas here in our country it's not. And so part of that is helping to translate that a bit more for them to say that this is not sufficient. It's kind of what we've been talking about with the book From Christendom to Apostolic Mission in our diocese, looking at, well, when you have a Christendom culture, when basically the DNA of the bones are Catholic or Christian, you kind of can get carried along in the flow. And things basically happen. Some things can deter that or encourage it, but pretty much the culture is basically Christian ethos, but now we're not. And so you have to be much more intentional, and they haven't caught up to that yet. But they're starting to realize that because their kids are going to the public schools or they're going to these other institutions, they're coming home and being like, I don't believe in God anymore, and the parents are shocked. And they're like, what do you mean you don't believe in God anymore? They come back, they say, I think I'm a boy when they're a girl, or I think I'm a girl, I'm a boy. It's like, where'd you get this idea, right? And so they're starting to wake up. But our task as a church is really to help them to realize we're not living in Nicaragua, we're not living in Mexico City, we're not living in Guatemala. We don't have these religious festivals, and so you need to bring them to us. You need to actually live these things and share them with us. And so we have a big Guadalupe feast every year and coming up, and that's one of the ways they contribute. But I've been telling them, hey, there's other feasts that are special to the different regions, and I want you to celebrate those because those will enrich us also.
That's one of the things that attracts me in the Catechesis of the Good Shepherd, where you have a sense of the physicality of the gestures. You're introduced to both in the liturgy, but also in things like processions. There are those elements as well. But also a very sort of specific and intentional approach to the Bible. Where it's a story, but it's a story that exists on so many different levels, and then you can start to go down through those levels and become independently strong in your understanding of what it means for you, what its consequences are in your life, and so forth. Can you talk to that a little bit, like a Bible-based community as an antidote to the fragmentation of our society?
Yeah, I mean, as far as the Word of God being the foundation, it's absolutely a key. I was fortunate that I went to Franciscan University of Steubenville for the first couple years of my formation, and I studied under Dr. von Bergsma, and he changed my life because he gave me a covenantal typological understanding of the Old Testament. And I say it over and over again to people, had I not had his one semester class in the Old Testament, I wouldn't know how to preach, because all the rest of my seminary formation didn't teach me the big overarching thread. And so I'm thankful for CGS because they do try and keep the thread of what is the big story of, from creation, redemption and parousia, like how does this all tie together? How is it one narrative? And just when I preach on these things, like people, their eyes get big and they're like, oh my gosh, like this all is one story. It all makes sense. It's not a bunch of just stories that like have no relation to each other, which is how most of our modern scripture scholarship is. And so realizing the way the fathers read the Bible was very different. And the Catechesis of the Good Shepherd is much more patristic, really, in its understanding of really just getting to the heart of these things. And yes, I very much see once people understand how the scriptures fit together, they realize this is why we have a hierarchy, it's why we have liturgy, it's why we have any of the sacraments, because it's all contained right in there. It's one of these things that's living in the place of tension of, like, I'd love it to be to parousia, but it's not there. and I think that's the place of just saying it takes a lot of time, and so it takes a lot of patience to build up atrium spaces, especially because we're a mid-sized parish, one priest parish, kind of a suburban place, a place with more resources, more space, would be able to do it maybe faster. But I do think the way we're doing it right now is good, because it just takes word of mouth. It takes time, and just people have to see it, and you can't rush these things. And so I'm trying to live into that place, because I like to get stuff done quicker. And it's like, well, this is not a microwave solution. This is a crock pot. And so seeing that, and seeing the way the church thinks, also the church thinks in centuries and not in years. And so I think it's kind of trying to live into that reality of, anything worth doing is worth taking the time to set it up, make sure the foundation is good. And so I'm just hopeful for the future. I'm grateful for what I've seen thus far, and it's helped to challenge my Germanic task-oriented kind of way of thinking, of saying, it's not so important as how many things you get done or how many kids you have in a program, but looking at really the quality, because our Lord took 12 disciples and really invested a lot in them, and look what happened. And so I really think these kids that are going through it right now are going to be quite remarkable disciples.
That's really helpful. Maybe you can go a little farther along that line, because, two directions. One is the financial or space dimension, because this isn't a rich place,
No.
right?
No.
And our foundation has given you a little help, but honestly, not that much.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Maybe you could just say a little bit about, like, what are we talking about, money-wise? How many people do you need? What's the footprint to get going?
Yeah, it really, as far as what you need to make this happen, you really need dedicated space. And the more dedicated spaces you have, the more children you can put through. Obviously, our space limitations are such that we can have, I think for the 3 to 6 atrium, we can have about 7 or 8 kids at a time. I think maybe 10 max, I think, and then 2 catechists in it for each session. And they're a couple-hour sessions. So you figure, well, if you have 20, 30 children in 3 to 6, you need at least the 2 catechists are willing to do several hours a week, or you need to have several catechists who can rotate through. If you have more atrium spaces, you can do more. But yeah, it's a couple years of investment of a couple $1,000s a piece per catechist, and then you have the spaces and creating all of the things. So it's not a small investment. It's very expensive, but you look at the fruit of it, that really you're teaching children to enter into a quiet space to encounter the mysteries of the faith. There's nothing like it. It's hard to compare it, because you have an hour class once a week. You're learning stuff in a classroom, and you got a chalkboard, and you got a workbook of things. It's totally different to be handling like things that are tangible and real, and meditating upon them, and they're high quality and they're durable, and realizing the space was made for you, and it's not just like, hey, be quiet, you're in class, but really saying you can engage whatever the Holy Spirit's leading you in. It's to create that environment is way different, and I can understand why a lot of people wouldn't do it, because you look at it and like, that's a scary price figure there, that's a scary investment of time, and I don't have time to do that. I can buy some books from the publisher, and I can get some people to do it. So I understand the struggle, and it's our struggle, honestly, as well, of just how do we balance those. But you have to. It's kind of like the Israelites, right? When they leave Egypt, and they're in the desert, and they're not in the promised land yet. And they have to be able to keep going. Moses and Aaron have to continually remind them, hey, remember, you were a slave in Egypt. And that's what I have to keep going back to. Our kids are leaving the faith here just as fast as anywhere else. And I had to look at that hard in the mirror just this last year and a half. I've been here about almost 8 years. And I'm a pretty dynamic guy, I'd like to think, and I like to think that I'm capable of preaching the gospel, but I'm not as entertaining as the culture. I can't win. Right? It's like the fact is that I have seen just as many kids leave our confirmation programs and never return to the church as any other parish across the United States. And so something has to change. And that something is we're focusing on the family. We're focusing on teaching children to pray. We're focusing on just really getting rooted and grounded. And catechesis is one piece of that strategy, which gets them at the very youngest age to say, you can either put your kid in front of a tablet, or you can have them encounter real things. You can have them be in the virtual world. You can have them be in the real world, which is a sacramentally charged universe. And just that's what I'm hoping that catechesis will kind of sort of wake up in our people, that we want that.
That's excellent. I think that's a kind of a perfect description that you just did of the problem and the solution that we hope to help here. And I think it's also very important what you said before about quantity, that we don't know how long this is going to take, and we don't know, the seed might be very small, the remnant might be very small, but that's how we started, so we can hope that it's going to work again.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that the church, we just have to get back to what is the model of Jesus. He takes a small group of people, he invests a lot of time in them. He preaches to the nations, but he lives with a very small group and really pours himself out for these people. And just seeing what's mission versus formation. And you can't expect to form 300 kids or like 80 children, and it's something really deeply without a lot of investment from the adults. Like, we just can't expect one catechist to do that. That's crazy. So I think it's really trying to challenge the church to wake up a little bit and see what's really involved in the process of conversion and formation of the next generation. It takes a lot more than we think. Yeah. And that's why we have to make the families strong, because if the family isn't strong, they're the ones who are principally with them. The church can't be a surrogate family. We have to really understand the parents are the primary educators of their children. And so then the catechesis really respects that and provides a space for the child to really say, okay, we've had our family experience here, now removed from the family encounter, coming to a different place. How do I encounter God as an individual, right? Not just part of the family, but how do I really have my own relationship with the Lord and with these things, and how do I then bring something back? And so it's this beautiful dynamic of love and formation, and yeah.
Last question that I wanted to ask you is, I was impressed yesterday meeting some of the catechists, and I'm sure in the coming days I will be again. They are people who one of them was 27 years old and very profound, very impressive as a person, as a teacher, as a faithful person. So have you seen any kind of pattern? Who is it that gets it? Who is it that understands this method and gets in deeply, and why? What is it that if you have any reflection on that?
Yeah, as far as who's the right person or who gets it, our parish, all of this, I have to step back and just say the reason why any of this is happening is because 6 years ago we became a perpetual adoration parish. So the idea of just who are the people that are coming forward and why are they high quality, it's because they've been formed in Eucharistic adoration. And so I see that, and I believe that very clearly, is that once we started doing adoration more regularly, then all these pieces started to come into play. They started to come to the parish. It was kind of like the Eucharist was the lighthouse that started to attract people to the Lord. And so I think all of the catechists that I've had, all of the ones who are here, they are here because they've been converted. Like, they are already converted people. Right now, I'm sure there are people who go through the catechesis and they become converted, and I can easily see that happen. But I think a lot of our people, they have been converted already by the Lord, and then they want to go deeper, because they have to have a hunger for this, because it's not an easy process. And so you can't just pick anybody. You have to say, okay, I'm looking around. Who are the people who are praying? Who are the people who are desirous for more? Who are the people who have a genuine love for kids and want to pour into them? And so all of these, I think at this point all of our people who are doing it are women. I don't think we've had any of the guys do it, but it's fine. I think that's definitely theology of the body at work there. But I think that's been the case, is that the people who have been teachers, or the people who have the disposition toward it, they have really just fallen in love again with teaching, because then they realize, oh gosh, this is what I've always actually wanted to do, versus kind of the more of the postmodern way of teaching, of just downloading information in the child and testing the download with tests, just to say this is really much more of a human integrated knowledge than what we see in a lot of school environments.